Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be talking about a Vladimir Putin speech on the ongoing crises within the world and on how a multipolar bloc is forming. And so we see here that Vladimir Putin says, today, Russia is not just actively participating in the formation of a new, fair multipolar world with equal rights and opportunities for all countries and civilizations. We are not only one of the leaders of this objective historical process, but I will say more, and everyone knows this. Russia is fighting on the battlefield for our future, for the principles of a just world, for the freedom of countries and peoples. We are fighting consistently, and our soldiers and officers, our heroes, are fighting and losing their comrades in arms. Okay, so this is a good stopping point for us to discuss this. So this has to be a really appealing message for any countries that are fearful of being the next target of the United States. We see here talking about a new, fair, multipolar world, so not being dominated by one power. And I think that was where the appeal of the Soviet Union, that's where the Soviet Union really lost its appeal, because it was you're either subservient to the United States or the Soviet Union during the Cold War. And so this newer multipolar world bloc doesn't have you be subservient to anyone. These various countries can have their own kind of systems. They can have their own belief systems as well. And we're seeing that not only that, but there's the encouragement of different civilizational states and civilizations in general, instead of the global homogeneity of the Western world, where the Western civilization, or the caricature of the former Western civilization, however you want to look at it, is the only civilization allowed in the world, and the others are diluted. And so they're saying here that they're not only leaders of this movement, so they've really taken on this role of being a part of the multipolar world bloc, but they're saying that their fight within Ukraine is one of the battlefields, one of the theaters of war for this conflict. And I would agree with them. I would say it's one of the early wars being waged for what is going to be 5 or 6 civilizations against the 7th civilization, which is the Western civilization. Again, when I say 5 or 6, it really means we're not sure what's happening with the Indian civilization right now. They're waffling on which side they're on for a variety of reasons, which we've covered in other videos. So let's move on with what this is saying. So I repeat again, the ruling elites of the United States and its satellites are behind the tragedy of the Palestinians, okay? The massacre in the Middle East in general, the conflict in Ukraine, and many other conflicts in the world, in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and so on. This has become obvious to everyone. Okay, so he's looking at this holistically, and I've talked about this in other videos as well. You have to be able to look at the trees and look at the forest and be able to look at how they're tied to each other as well. And so what he's looking at is he's saying, sure, this Russia-Ukraine conflict matters in a vacuum, but then you also have to tie it into the broader struggle that is going on between the multipolar world bloc and the Western civilization, the NATO alliance of the world. And so you're seeing him put Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and so on in that larger struggle. And I said they should do this back when Syria was being overthrown. I'm like, listen, and I have no idea. I just kind of threw this information into the void. I'm like, listen, Russia, multipolar world bloc that is forming, you guys can't let Syria fall because the United States is toppling people like dominoes. You need to make sure. I think I even said it was Syria and Libya at the time. I was talking about them. And unfortunately, Libya did fall. There was really not much that could be done after Gaddafi was overthrown. But Syria managed to stay as a pillar against the Western hegemony. Okay, so he goes on to say, Vladimir Putin says, it is they who install their military bases everywhere, who use military force on pretext and without any pretext, who send weapons to conflict areas. Yeah, this is something where the hypocrisy of the West and how they don't live out their values is very explicit, where they're supposedly the policemen of the world, but they actually don't resolve conflicts peacefully. They just make sure that their side wins. And so having all these bases across the world doesn't help the world. It just helps American allies within the world. So you're seeing that in Ukraine, where they're trying to genocide the Russian speakers in the Donbass and other areas. And you had, I think it was in Odessa, there was a building that caught fire that had Russian speakers in it. And it seemed like the fire was caused by non-Russian speakers that just didn't like Russian speakers. And then you had the Maidan massacre, the shooting of snipers, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have things like in Palestine where they're directly saying, like, listen, you can bomb hospitals and churches as long as you say that there were tunnels underneath that might have had Hamas people in it. So just ridiculous things being said. And it's very clear to, I think, nearly everyone, except for the Zionists, that America is installing its bases around the world in order to push its war and chaos agenda, which should be obvious because those are kind of the win conditions for America. So that's what they're doing with their bases. That's how they're using their influence. So Vladimir Putin goes on to say they are also channeling financial resources, including to Ukraine and the Middle East, and fueling hatred in Ukraine and the Middle East. Yeah, this is something that I think really took Vladimir Putin by surprise, which was he views the Ukrainians as his brothers, that they're genetically very similar to Russians. And so he went in with very gentle hands about how he dealt with the Ukrainian situation because he didn't want civilian casualties. He wanted to allow the military to surrender as much as possible and inflict as few of casualties as possible whenever possible. It's just a very gentle approach. And the West saw that as just him being weak, but he was trying as much as possible to limit the amount of casualties. And I don't think he realized how much hatred was fueled on the Ukrainian side for Russians and Russian speakers who they saw as subhuman. And the same is occurring in the Middle East, where the United States is supporting a very clearly genocidal regime in Israel, where they're talking openly about not focusing on accuracy, but focusing on maximum destruction. They're talking about how they're going to bomb hospitals, and then they pretend like they're not the ones that actually bomb the hospitals. I mean, it's just some silly, silly things. And it's just over and over again, the American empire fighting against all that is just and humane in the world. And he goes on to say, and this is completely true, they're not achieving results on the battlefield, so they want to split us from within as far as Russia is concerned, to weaken us and sow confusion. This has actually been a strategy for many decades for America. I think it really started probably after they lost Vietnam, where it was like, United States realized it can't actually win military conflicts on the battlefield. The United States, its military is mostly made up of the furry community. And so they can't win actual battles anymore. They lose in places like Afghanistan. They're barely holding on in Iraq, and Iraq wants them gone, and it looks like various Iraqi forces are going to be attacking them again. But what Vladimir Putin is saying here is that America just doesn't win on the battlefield. And so what they do is they foment dissent and tension within countries in order to fragment those countries and create hostilities, whether it's religious hostilities, ethnic hostilities, racial hostilities, hostilities between men and women. They do whatever they can to foment hostilities within a country because the United States just isn't capable of winning wars. Vladimir Putin goes on to say they do not want Russia to participate in solving any international regional problems, including in the Middle East settlement. This has been something where the United States has been really weak, particularly in the Judeo-Islamic War of 2023, where the United States isn't even really a negotiating power on what's going on. A lot of countries within the Muslim world just won't even talk to the United States at this point. If they want to negotiate with Israel or come to some type of conclusion, consensus within various Muslim powers, they talk to Russia or they talk to China. And so the United States is just losing diplomatically, economically, militarily, just across the board. The United States is a failed power at this point. And then he goes on to say they are not satisfied at all when someone does not act or speak exactly as they're instructed. They believe only in their own exclusivity and being allowed to do anything. Man, it's a funny post to hear from Vladimir Putin because Vladimir Putin used to be so pro-West, pro-NATO. He wanted to join NATO, he wanted to join the EU, and it just didn't work out. And so he's recognizing that, he's already recognized that he needs to take a different route. He's pivoted towards Asia, and he's really bought into the multipolar world bloc that has been forming. And so I don't think there's going to be a pivot back to Europe and the West at this point, even though he's really fond of German culture and things like that. Vladimir Putin just understands that in order for Russia to be successful, they have to focus on the multipolar world bloc. And so you love to see it because it's the good guys winning, and that doesn't happen as often as you would necessarily like. So that's where I'll leave you. Please, if you like this video, if you found it to be informative, please give us a thumbs up on YouTube and Rumble. It helps in the algorithm. Please subscribe to our channel on YouTube and Rumble for more content. Thank you for watching. If you have any comments, please leave that in the comment box below. And I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.